All knowledge is useless unless implemented. Hello, welcome. This is John on behalf of xenotheory.org, and I want to thank you for choosing to be here and accompany me down the rabbit hole where we pursue ideas under the impression that beauty and meaning are found by looking deeper and not further. Today, we're going to analyze this diagram here. You can call this the retention hierarchy or the learning pyramid, and essentially how we are able to access what we consciously come into contact with in terms of information throughout our journey in the world. Now, keep in mind that I feel like these particular percentages, these numbers here, are rather arbitrary. I don't necessarily agree with the percentages they've established here, but I do agree with the sequential order of these methodologies. So I do agree that we will retain much more of what we teach to others than we will from a book or a lecture or even a demonstration. So we're going to analyze all of these in order, but before we do that, I think it's important to proceed with a preliminary filtration system for the information that we come across in our life. I think it's especially relevant today. We have access to the age of information. We have access to all of our recorded history in the palm of our hands via a cell phone and the internet. So I think it's very helpful to have some sort of lenses in order to filter out this information. I've done a lot of thinking on this in my own life, and I've been able to establish 3 particular lenses for myself before I go and either accept or reject information in the world. And those 3 lenses would be the following. So the first lens that I would filter a piece of information through is this relevant or irrelevant to me? And this is obviously predicated and contingent on the idea that I would have established an ideal or a goal, or I know what I'm looking for. I've said in the past, if you don't know what you're looking for, anything will do. You have to have some sort of guidance system. So that way, the clearer you are on your goals, the clearer you are on your life path, on your career, whatever your mission is, whatever you're looking for in the world, or even in that relationship or in that certain circumstance, whatever you're looking for, the clearer you get in that ideal, in that end goal, the clearer the constituents and the intermediary processes will be to you. So once you establish your ideal, you can then say, okay, this is either relevant to me or it's completely irrelevant. So if I establish an ideal of my future self or my future career or whatever particular facet or aspect of my life that I wish to improve or apply toward, I can say, okay, this person is sharing information about this subject. I'm not interested. Or I can walk down the aisles of a bookstore and I could say, okay, I'm not interested in that subject. I'm not interested in this whole realm. I think that's the most implicit of the lenses out of all of us. I think all of us implicitly do that. I think we can all get a little bit more clear on what can be relevant or irrelevant. A lot of information can be kind of just numbing. And it's not necessarily productive or destructive. It's just kind of, it's filler, if you will. So the second lens that we can additionally superimpose on top of this first lens of, is this relevant to my life and what I want to do in my life, or is this irrelevant? Should I just not listen to it? Is I would say the verifiable scale. So is this a random opinion that has been unchecked from somebody who has no merit or no competence in the realm that they're giving advice from? So it might be just projection. It's an opinion. They're just blindly spewing emotional nonsense. Or is it factual? Is it objectively true? Is it helpful, right? And this can be a little bit tricky in terms of determining the validity of something, if it's objectively true or objectively or subjectively false. In the particular particular realm of anything in the area of a philosophy, of some psychology. So with that in mind, something can be relevant and something can be subjectively true to some people and also relevant to me. But that doesn't necessarily leave, it leaves too much room for interpretation. So for that reason, I've established a third and final lens for myself. Again, there's probably more implicitly, but to my conscious knowledge, I use 3 lenses in filtering information. The third and final lens would be, is this information constructive or destructive? Is this information empowering or disempowering? So I'll give you an example that I would need to have this third lens for. Relevant or irrelevant? Okay, so let's talk about a life philosophy, how I choose to view the world. That's absolutely relevant to something I want to implement into my life if I want to lead more fulfilled life, more meaningful life, more enthusiastic, etc. So it's relevant. Let's talk about that subject. Second lens, is this true or false? Or is this fact or opinion? It's kind of difficult to get specific with that in that particular realm, like morality or ethics or philosophy or an attitude or a perspective on your life, right? You can't really say my perspective is right and yours is wrong. We're both right in our own eyes. So that's something where you can say it's subjectively true for two people. Practical example, somebody who entertains nihilism or pessimism. They can say, or they can be a misanthrope. They can say the human race is a virus, it's a cancer, it's a disease. People are only out for their own self-interest. Nobody wants to help other people. It's all a facade. Everybody is exploitative. Everybody is extremely greedy. Everybody is a tyrant if they had the opportunity to. Everybody's out for themselves. You're only going to get betrayed in the end. You only have to look out for yourself. The world is a terrible place. They can entertain all that philosophy all they want. They can be nihilistic, they can be pessimistic, and in their eyes, they're as right as they have to be. And person B, you can say they can be an optimist, or they can just choose to entertain more constructive or positive thoughts. And they can say the world is a lovely place. I find in other people what is truly in myself. I like to view other people as a similar consciousness embodying a different vessel. I view people as myself. I literally embody the golden rule. There's so much beauty and meaning to be found in the world if I only look deep enough. So these two people are objectively or subjectively true and correct in their own ways, but we can obviously superimpose this final lens of constructive or deconstructive or empowering versus disempowering, and we'll clearly come to the conclusion that the person who's entertaining nihilism, pessimism, that's extremely disempowering. So that's why I have that third and final lens. Now, with those three lenses in mind, we can now transition over into this hierarchy over here for retention and learning. So moving sequentially through the top all the way to the bottom, we first have lecture, and this is 5%. Again, like I said, these numbers, I don't think they're necessarily relevant or important, but it's safe to say we retain a very little percentage of the lecture. And there's many reasons for this. I think, first of all, we're subject to the speaker's cadence, choice of words, their competence in explaining what points they're trying to get across. We are subject to the particular speed. We can't pause, we can't reflect. If we zone out, we can't rewind it, of course. So that's why we are purely recipients of the other individuals, the speakers' modalities and methodologies of operation. So moving on to the second one, reading. This is similar to a lecture. We are still subject to the author's verbiage, grammatical rules, arguments, propositions, etc. But we can pause. We can at least control the pace. So we have a little bit of input there. We can control the pace. We can pause. We can reflect. We can summarize. We can put things in our own words, etc. So I think we have a little bit more conscious control there, and that's why we can retain, at least it's saying double, but again, I think these percentages are irrelevant. But I would say it's definitely a lot more than a lecture. I found myself spacing out a lot in lectures, but with reading, if you space out, like I said, you can just flip back a few pages, restart, and just do it again. Audio visual. So I think this is going to limit the possibility that we have to engage in daydreaming because it's going to be more demanding of our senses. So if we have if we are in the top two sections, if we're in a lecture or we're reading a book, obviously only our visual sense is engaged. And our other, auditory sense, we can listen to something, we can hear our text message go off on our phone, we can hear something on the TV, we can hear something in the other room of our house, whatever happens to be. We have more propensity to get distracted if the fewer of our senses are engaged at one time. So audiovisual, I think, is lessening the probability that we have to be distracted. Therefore, you're going to pay attention more. And I think your attention is also going to be, you can consciously bounce back between your senses. So audio and visual, of course. So you can listen to what the person's saying, and then you can bounce back once you're tired or once you wanted to drift off with your listening. You can then engage your visual sense, which is also going to be enriching and illuminating in this particular diagram, whatever the speaker or author would be using in the diagram. So demonstration, I think you're going to retain a little bit more. It's very similar to audio-visual. Obviously, a lot more senses are engaged. But for some people or for some authors who might not be able to convey things in a practical or pragmatic sense, this can help ground their principles in everyday reality. So they can be on these ethereal and ephemeral realm of thought and talking all these ideas and conceptual knowledge and intellectual propositions all the time. But if they don't really ground them in reality, they can seem a little bit distant for some people. And going back to the first lens that I established, not really relevant, because if they're just talking about ideas all day, some people are there not only for ideas, some people are there to maybe improve their life. Some people are there to try to fix that particular section of their life. So that's why they're pursuing this author or this speaker or this lecture or this particular book, right? So moving on, crossing this chasm, I would say the first four methodologies of learning are passive. You are subject to, you are more of a recipient than you are an influencing factor in the entire variable. So moving on to this chasm, we are now into the realm of active learning. So the first methodology in this particular hierarchy in active learning, we have discussion. So we filter out exactly what we learn and what we didn't understand, and then we can entertain other thoughts, other perspectives, other ideologies, other philosophies in terms of how people are going to implement these ideas that they've learned from the book, the audiovisual demonstration, the lecture, etc. And then you can bounce ideas off each other. And I think this is also going to play into the correction phase of cutting out and truncating whatever is irrelevant from the particular presentation or discussion. And then you're going to find the principles that the author or speaker was trying to convey to you. You're going to find these through discussion, because when you discuss things, you're establishing your perspective. When you put things in your own words, you have to escape from the author's particular grammatical phrases and sentences. And if you don't do that, this is from a book called How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. If you don't escape the particular words and phrases that the author uses, it means you haven't understood. It means you have memorized, right? So if you can't really escape from their terms, I think that's a very good test to see if you've retained a lot of the information, or if you're just memorizing the particular data points or the actual sentences or quotes or paragraphs, for example. So the next phase in our active learning journey we have here is practice. So I think this is a similar chasm between reading and audiovisual demonstration with discussion and practice, because with discussion, same kind of thing goes with lecture. You can kind of zone out if somebody's saying something that's irrelevant, if somebody's saying something that you particularly disagree with, if they're espousing a disempowering philosophy, maybe you don't feel like you're in the right to correct them. You want to just leave them and be as destructive and disempowering as they want to be. That's totally fine. You might just completely zone out. So when you have to do something in practice, it's going to engage a lot more of your senses, and it's going to challenge you to be sure that you've actually understood the information that you've come across and come in contact with. And again, you're going to really implement the principles of the philosophy. You can't implement just grammatical words and propositions. You have to implement principles based off of your own interpretation and own understanding. So I think that really makes the idea practical when you execute on it, because you then understand, okay, what are the effects of this? Is this actually valid? Did I understand the propositions correctly? Am I at fault in my implementation process, or is the idea at fault before the implementation process? And you're going to figure all this out through practice. Now, the next one, I think the final one, which is at 90%, I don't know if it's actually that percent, but I do believe it is the highest. I do agree with that proposition, the highest retention rate, and that is teaching others. So when you put things in your own words, you become the creator. You are no longer a pure recipient of information. You are a proliferator, you can say, of these ideas, of these principles, of these propositions. So there is something called the Feynman Technique. Richard Feynman, he was a brilliant physicist, and actually on his blackboard before he died, he said, if I cannot create it, or rather, he said on his blackboard, what I cannot create, I do not understand. So if you can't create something, again, this is teaching the subject, teaching your principles. That's you creating something. If you can't create it, you don't understand it. So I think that is a testament to this retention of 90% at teaching others. Another practical example is the Feynman Technique, where if you can't explain something simply enough to maybe a 7 or 8 year old child, you probably don't understand that thing deep enough. I know this autobiographically. I have a 6-year-old nephew. He asks the most profoundly philosophical questions. And especially what is very challenging is when he goes on those strings of, okay, yes, but why? But why? And you keep going further with that. And it's a very profound intellectual exercise, because I can explain something to a contemporary or to somebody who's read the same book as me, because they'll have the implicit knowledge of what I'm talking about. And there's a lot of words, there's a lot of phrases, a lot of ideas that fit in relation to context of one another. But by themselves, without context, they might be very hard to elucidate, especially to a 6-year-old or 7-year-old. So it's been very challenging to do that, but it really, really tests the limits and boundaries of my knowledge. So that's a very illuminating experience. So if you can really simplify things as much as possible, I think it's a very helpful experience mutually for the recipient and for you, because it's going to allow you to express all of an entire book in a sentence, for example, or, summarize what you've learned in terms of a practical principle. So what we can learn from, I guess, this entire hierarchy, what we can learn from this entire pyramid, what we can learn from this process, is to, I would say, immediately, once we come into contact with information, again, this is all predicated on the idea that we've established our ideal, we know where we want to go, we know what we're looking for in life, therefore we can implement some version of those 3 lenses that I established in the beginning. It could be those exact 3, you could establish your own, totally fine. But again, I said relevant or irrelevant, that's one lens. The second lens is, you could say truth or false. And the third lens is this empowering or disempowering? So those are 3 lenses you can use. So you establish your lenses, you establish your ideal, and with that, you then go out and seek information that's going to help you get to your goal. So point A to point B. And as a practical application of all this, I think it can be effective to really just jump right to the bottom. So practice and teaching others. So if it's a very practical realm of, let's say, self-help, let's say personal development, say you want to get in better shape, you want to improve your career, you want to improve your social skills, improve your confidence, these are all very practical people skills. You can find books, you can find subjects on the topic, find videos, and then I think it could be very wise to immediately jump to the highest forms of retention, mainly practice and teaching others. So first of all, practice. If you find a principle, if you find a interesting quote, if you find something that's very thought-provoking, if you find something that you agree with, or you think it'd be challenging for you to implement, but it would be valuable, write it in your planner the next day. That's something I've done for years. If I find a very interesting idea or something I would think would improve my life, I try to execute on it as fast as I possibly can. So once I read it from a book, I'll pull it out of the book and I'll put it literally on my tomorrow's to-do list, whatever that practice or action step was. I'll put it in my journal, so I'm looking at it and I consciously have to execute on it. I consciously have to practice on it. And again, this was one of the lowest rungs on the hierarchy at 75% retention. That is practice. The second thing we can do is teaching others. And you don't have to have necessarily an audience to do this. You can record videos by yourself. You can also write things in your own words. Now, I despised school. I despise the whole education system in general. But one thing I do very much appreciate is the fact that they would always say, put things in your own words. If you can't escape the author's words, you don't really understand it. And I think that's very, very valuable. So once you read something, if you read a book, if you read a chapter of a book, if you're watching a YouTube video, just have a notebook out and take notes on it, or you can just type it on your computer, but try as much as you can to put things in your own words, maybe fortify them with some own personal examples and anecdotes and stories so you can really get this deeper into your memory. And then what we're going to do from that practice and teaching others, you're going to have all of that information, or most of it, again, 75 and 90%, able to be accessible through your conscious memory and active recall. So to summarize, once you come across information, implement it as soon as you possibly can, have a favor for execution, and summarize what you've learned in journals or in videos or in discussions to others, and try to teach what you know. Always remember that withheld truth is poison and truth expressed is medicine. I hope you find value. Thank you.